This is the Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well podcast, episode 35. I'm your host, Lisa Salisbury, and we are going to be talking all about yoga today. Amanda Lau is a trauma bodywork specialist and yoga instructor, and she is my guest today. She is going to share with us the importance of including yoga in our movement routines and the different types of yoga, how to get started, and how to fit it into our schedules. This is part 3 of my movement series with our episode on resistance training a couple weeks ago. And then last week we did energy expenditure and learning about NEAT, that non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And then capping off today with yoga, just a totally different way to move your body. When my clients are asking me what exercise they should do, mostly they're asking me what exercise is going to help them lose weight. But I always tell them the exercise you should do is the one you enjoy, because that's the one you're going to stick with. And remember, exercise and movement is part of our Live Well pillar. This is separate from your efforts in the kitchen and with your nutrition as far as weight loss goes. The benefits for exercise are highly, highly mental, and we end up having better thoughts about ourselves. And that is what is going to translate into making better choices in and around the kitchen. So listen in, see if yoga might be right for you to try. Amanda has some great tips, like I said, for how to get started, but also even how to choose a studio or a location and how to do some yoga at home. Lastly, I do want to acknowledge that the sound quality on this episode is not up to my normal standards. The interview was so good, though, I wanted to publish anyway. I even sent it off to a professional editor to see if they could fix it up a little bit. But I think most of you wouldn't have even noticed, but I just wanted to make mention in case this is your first episode with me. All right, let's go. Welcome to Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well, the podcast for women who want to lose weight, but are tired of counting and calculating all the food. I'm your host, Lisa Salisbury. I'm a certified health and weight loss coach and life coach, and most importantly, a recovered chronic dieter. I'll teach you to figure out why you are eating when you aren't hungry instead of worrying so much about what you are eating. I'm excited today to have Amanda Lau as my guest. I was reaching out trying to find an expert in yoga, and her name came up. So I was really excited that she agreed to be a guest on the podcast. I'm going to let her introduce herself and give us a little background about what she does.
My name is Amanda, like you just said, and I have been teaching yoga for about 10 years. My practice started about 24 years ago. I kind of came into yoga as a suggestion from a therapist I was actually seeing, just to kind of alleviate some stress I was dealing with, to manage some anxiety symptoms. It was something that was really helpful and beneficial to my healing. And so my passion just kind of grew. And as my children got a little older and time permitted, I ended up going into train. I've trained under many formats, but I would say my passion kind of lies with trauma work. So that's typically what I tend to do. I would also say that I've got about 2,000 hours of teaching that I've accomplished over the 10 years. And yeah, it's just a passion. I would say my other passions include traveling. I love to travel with my kiddos, and garden and reading for sure.
Well, we are soul sisters.
Yeah.
That's me too. I was just looking up like, what seeds do I need to buy? What new melons do I want to try this year?
Yeah, it's finally nice and spring-like here in Nashville. And so I've already been planning my garden for some time and counting down to June for some travel.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, we are going to talk about yoga today. I was starting to tell Amanda when we first were on, like, my history with yoga. I'm like, we'll just wait and talk about it at the podcast. So my first experience with yoga was when I had joined a gym when I think it was my second baby was like 6 weeks old. So it was, it was rough, like bringing a toddler and a baby into the gym daycare. And I'm like, I'm going to try a yoga class. And I go up there and I didn't sweat. And my cardio bunny brain was like, what is happening? And then they called me out because the baby needed something. And I was like, well, that was a colossal waste of time. And so I didn't step foot in another yoga studio for years because I just did not understand. And granted, this was like, like a Gold's Gym. So probably not the highest quality yoga either. Amanda's making a face. She's like, oh no. Yeah. So I since have tried several different types. I can't remember how to say it, but Bikram, I think is how you say it, with the hot yoga. I did that for a little bit. I currently go to Hotworks and do their yoga, which is fairly short and it's similar because it's the static poses. I don't know all the names, but I know that I kind of am in this place where I'm like, I should do more yoga, but I also struggle with how to fit it in with the other exercise. And as opposed to back then when I just was like all into cardio, now I do more weightlifting and more of a well-rounded movement routine. And so we're going to talk today about some of the benefits, why we would want to get yoga on our schedule, and how we can incorporate it. So let's start with the benefits. Most of my listeners, I would say basically all, are women. So why should women do yoga, specifically in our age range, 35 to 55 kind of spot, or even older? Like, why should we even bother?
Well, I would begin to start by saying that I would say most people walk into a yoga studio and they have a little bit of a trauma story attached to their first yoga class. It's very common.
Like mine.
I would first like to tell people that, yoga can feel really intimidating. You walk into a studio, they're speaking a language maybe you don't understand, they're using words that you don't understand. The number one thing I hear people say is, I can't do yoga because I'm not flexible.
Oh yeah, that's me too. I didn't mention that, but yes.
So most people who walk in, or if they ask me, what do I do for a living? And I tell them that, I like to call myself a yoga therapist because I'm not just teaching. I'm walking people through their bodies, whether that's attached to their stories, maybe their trauma stories, also kind of where they're at now. A lot of times these things will show up secondary in chronic conditions, right? Chronic pain, inflammation. And so people are walking in and they want to have empowerment over their bodies, right? And they want to feel empowered in their wellness journey. However, many don't give yoga a chance because it can feel really intimidating. And so I would say the first thing is you don't have to be flexible to do yoga. The biggest thing we're doing, yes. I like to tell people that's something you get to maybe grow. It's considered a practice, right? None of us really show up in any sport or any activity and pretend to know that we're an expert or that we can do this really, really well. And so just like any other exercise or sport or, anything that meditation, any of these things, it's a practice. So it might take a few, times to get comfortable. To answer your question, I would first say that for women, I'm in my 40s, and I would say as you enter your 40s, some of the biggest misnomers is that we have this idea that we need to show up to the gym and we need to count our calories and we need to get our heart rate blasting through the roof. And what I've learned transitioning from my 30s into my 40s is some of those workouts don't help my body anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
I end up feeling like poop afterwards. I feel ran down. And then what happens is you tend to skip the next day. You will fall off the bandwagon. You can't show or move your body for 2 or 3 days. And so what I've realized is that I had to kind of approach even myself, who's someone who, yes, I practice yoga daily. I also had to start incorporating different things. One of the biggest benefits for yoga is it is a complete body workout. So you're not just working out your body, you're working out your soul, you're working out your mind, you're resetting your mind and giving it a chance to just breathe. I like to tell people some of the benefits of yoga is it's really great for your endocrine system, which is huge for women. So a very simple way to regulate your stress hormones. So for people that are walking in out of daily life, right, especially coming out of what we've just gone to for 3 years with the pandemic, our bodies are so elevated with stress hormones. The other thing that's really beneficial for women is our adrenals. It really helps to reset the adrenals. And this is not just through the forms of meditating and breathing, but it's also to these poses where you're twisting and you're constricting your body. The other thing that's really important that I think a lot of people miss is it's a great practice for balance. And I just read an article recently that Being able to balance on one leg for 10 seconds lengthens your life by up to a decade.
That's crazy.
And that sounds crazy, right?
Okay.
But if you think about as we
Wow.
age, most people end up getting hurt because of balance, right? How many people do we know that might break a hip, hurt a joint? And so the thing is that balance is actually one of the easiest things to improve quickly.
Yeah. I love those balance poses. And I mean, every time I'm with my mom, I'm like, she's going to fall over. She has zero balance, which I mean, I've seen her to stand on one leg. There's no possible way. And I always thought it was like because she doesn't have core strength, but it can also just apparently just be a balance issue, not even a strength issue.
Well, I mean, when you look at balance, you've got over 26 bones in your feet. So when you think about that, right, and I like to tell people if you're not using it, you're losing it. And so how often as we age do we just simply stand on one leg, right? We're not walking around just trying to stand on one leg. And so if you can find yourself a studio, and what I would say to those that maybe are older and have that fear of falling over, there's a lot of studios that now incorporate chair yoga. So you'll have a chair next to you for those that maybe don't feel like they have the confidence. I've taught those classes with a lot of my older clients in their 70s or 80s. And if they've got the support of that chair, they're sitting in the chair to maybe do some of these more deeper stretches and twists. But also when they're doing those balance poses, they have a place to hold on to.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into some of the different types of yoga because this is where I get really overwhelmed when I have gone into yoga studios before. I'm like, I don't know what to try. I don't know where my skills, would line up with these classes. And obviously, they don't line up with any of them when I first started. But when we're thinking about some of those benefits, like what are the different types and why would you choose one over another based on your needs? Does that make sense?
Completely. I would first start by saying in the US, there are over 40 different types of yoga. That can be really overwhelming to people. So when you think about yoga, if you can kind of visualize a tree, right? You have this core trunk of just traditional yoga. And then you have all these branches. And what happens is you have a lot of these yoga schools, yoga instructors who will kind of make their own form. And so that I think is another level of like intimidation. It's hard to say, I'm going to go to this studio. What form of yoga are they teaching? And so I like to keep it simple to people. I would probably invite people to maybe explore at the most 4 or 5 types. Your first type is going to be a Vinyasa. And this is a very kind of just common yoga class. It's very adaptable to all levels. I want you to kind of think of there'll be a little bit of movement. There might be some balance postures. Typically, there's maybe 10 or 15 minutes of stretching to kind of warm you up and then to end your practice. But I like to tell people this is kind of a really good practice for people who just are maybe getting new to yoga, want to explore what it's like, get their heart rate up a little bit, get some work in their balance postures, get some flexibility. It's kind of that serves everyone, so to speak. Another one would be a yin yoga. And yin, and I would also kind of lump in restorative. They're very similar. So they are going to be more of deep stretching, not a lot of movement, not a lot of those sun salutations you see where people are kind of moving and really cohesive with their breath. I teach restorative quite often, and there are days we don't even stand up during a class. You're going to have the support of a lot of props, maybe some straps, and this is going to include you sitting in a certain posture. And really what it means is just giving your body permission to maybe surrender in that posture for 5 or 6 minutes. Yin is a little more active in the sense that this is really good for people who do another type of exercise. So I have a lot of runners who do yin because it's deep stretch. It's going to help recover those muscles. I have a lot of men who play golf that will come and do yin because they'll say, this is helping my golf swing better, And what it is just giving you permission to kind of let those muscles recover if you're someone who is very active on the other days. The other one that I would suggest to people if you're just getting started is a form called Ashtanga. It can also be anything that you see like Hot 26 or the Bikram type. So this is structured more, you have the same flow. So you're going to show up in a class and you're going to know that you get the same class. It's going to be the exact same one the next day, even if it's a different teacher, because it's going to be the same postures over and over. And so there's a bit of repetition. Why this is good for some that want maybe a little more challenge is it's a great place you can kind of gauge your growth, right? Because you have your own way, you know what's going to happen the next day. You can start to gauge. It can be really beneficial for those that maybe just need to almost kind of zone out because you know what your class is going to be. And so it can be really meditative in the sense that the movement is predictable. Your body can just kind of take over. But it does tend to be a little more endurance-wise. You're going to have a little more movement. Heart rate will probably get up a little bit. You can always go to a hot room. That's going to increase your heart rate. And so those are kind of my main ones I like to tell people.
Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing if you're new, start with some Vinyasa. Probably not the hot rooms just yet, if you're
Not
new.
Yet. What can be really intimidating to hot rooms is some of the hot rooms, if it's a traditional hot room, the heat can be really high. And then some of the hot rooms will actually lock you in the room because they don't want you to leave the room if you tend to get maybe stressed out or your body, so you start getting scared because you feel like you're out of breath. Because that transition from the really hot room back into maybe the foyer or the waiting area, it can cause people to pass out. And so there can be some triggering there, if that makes sense. Like if you're someone who doesn't like the heat and you've never done a hot yoga class, I wouldn't say sign up for that one first. Like definitely try some other forms of yoga first.
You said you are like for trauma. What type do you teach then, if that was something someone would want to try?
Yeah, so trauma yoga is structured in a few different ways. There's not one format. Trauma yoga is less about what your practice looks like and more about trying to integrate yourself back into your body. We use this word agency when we work about trauma work, and agency is the feeling in your own body that you have control, that you have power, and that you have choice. And I like to tell people when you experience trauma, and I would begin that by saying, one of the biggest things I've noticed about women in their 40s and their 50s is they come in and they've got that secondary maybe pain or, their endocrine system's through the roof. They're trying to get their hormones under control. And, they're also dealing with these traumas. And I say traumas because we tend to walk in and we say, I don't have any trauma in my life. And yes, you may have not had these really big T traumas, but trauma can also show up as grief. Maybe they're going through a divorce. Maybe they are losing a parent. Maybe they are empty nesters and they're grieving the loss of, that normalcy to them. And that can show up as trauma in our bodies because these are situations that are creating disruption on our lives. We don't really have power over them, right? And we don't get to choose necessarily what's happening. And so these women, they come in and they might be super disassociated with their bodies. They might be in a state of hyperarousal where they're on edge. They can't sit still. They're nervous. And what trauma yoga looks like is first I try to meet them where their body is. That means if they're in a state of hyperarousal, I'm not going to make them just lay there for 10 minutes on a yoga mat. We're going to do some movement to get some of that nervous energy out. But then we can start to say, how can we then bring a little bit of integration back into your body? How can you take this time in a yoga class to feel like you feel empowered over your body, that you feel like you have choice, and then maybe learn some ways to take it from there and then take it outside of that yoga studio or mat.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay, so here's where my brain gets tripped up with yoga is I just did an episode with a trainer for women who prioritizes weightlifting, especially for the listeners of my podcast. Most of them are in a weight loss phase of their life. They are trying to do some fat loss. So we do emphasize weight training, strength training, resistance, however you want to term it. And this is what I do as well, which is partly some of that strength for getting older, keeping our muscles, avoiding sarcopenia, all of those kinds of benefits. So I'm like, okay, how do I fit in yoga? How many days a week? Like someone like you're like, I do it every day. But for someone who's trying to start into it and like, okay, I see these benefits, but I don't have time to do 2 workouts a day or, right? Like how, I hate to say like, what's the lowest, there's a term for it, but like the lowest dose, the lowest effective dose, I think
Right.
is the term, right? What's the lowest
Right.
effective dose of yoga that could help us if a person is still like, you know what, I'm a runner, but I want to do yoga, or I'm a weightlifter, but I want to start incorporating yoga. How can we incorporate it? Where would you see that? Say you're lifting 3 times a week. What would that look like to incorporate yoga?
I would once again preface it by saying that taking a yoga class, you're still getting some of those benefits, right? You're still going to get some of the benefits of weightlifting because you are lifting weight. You're using your own body weight, right? If you've ever done a chaturanga, you're going to know that you're having some weight building. You are using your own body weight to do push-ups. You're using your own body weight to stand on one leg. And so I would say, don't discount that yoga is not going to still give you some of those benefits. The other thing I would say is that as I've aged, some of my own personal fitness coach that I, work with referred to me that a lot of times when we get into our 40s, these exercises that we did in our 20s and our 30s, they're really intense. And so what does that create? It creates a little bit of cortisol in your body, right? And so anytime we're introducing even cortisol, even through the form of, activities, exercise, we still need to reset that. And so part of that is maybe taking and kind of shifting your brain. And one thing I've started to do is that I do lift weights. I lift weights maybe 2 or 3 days a week. Incorporating yoga could look like maybe it's just 10 minutes of stretching or slowing down your breath to maybe counteract what that cortisol might be doing in your body, right? So if you're a runner and you're running 3 or 4 days a week, what would it look like to take 10 minutes after your run to lay on your mat, maybe do a few simple twists, some stretches for your body, but then also really the most important thing is to give yourself 5 minutes of stillness and just recover your breath and bring your adrenals down through breath work, through a little bit of meditation. So that way you're getting the benefits of both your run, but you're also giving yourself permission to recover. And the number one question I get asked in yoga is, what is the hardest pose, Amanda? What is the hardest pose? We can look on Instagram. Yeah. And we see all these bendy people and all these crazy things. And that's intimidating. That's not happening in a yoga studio most of the time. I would say the number one hardest pose for people is giving yourself 5 minutes of your savasana at the end of your class and not moving. I call it the groundhog effect. And I know people can't see me, but it's literally people are laying there and they're lifting their heads up and looking around like, is it over? And it's just 5 minutes, but it can be the hardest thing for us to do is to just give us our 5 minutes of stillness, of quiet, being with your breath, and letting your body just kind of, unpack and recover a bit.
Yeah. That is actually one of my favorite parts too. And Hotworks, where I was saying that I do those shorter yoga classes, but it's on a recorded loop. And so I always have to jump up before I get into that. I jump up and I turn the volume all the way down so they don't go, okay, it's over, gather your things, leave. And I'm always like, please, no one be coming in for the next class, because I do love that, that time to just recenter. And so for those that don't know, this Savasana is laying down. You're laying down on your back, typically with your hands open up to the sky.
Yeah, you can. I like to tell people hands are open in a posture to receive, but some people need their hands down because it's grounding for them. And so it just, kind of be curious. Sometimes people like one hand on their heart, one on their belly, so they can really connect with their breath. Sometimes we have a harder time internally connecting with our bodies, but the beauty is we can take our kind of sensations externally. And so then you can feel your breath, you can feel your heartbeat, and those are connections to your body, right? It doesn't just have to be this deep internal mystery, sometimes externally connecting, touching the fabric, touching your skin will start that conversation back and give you those connection points back into your body. I would say I hear how it works a lot, and we actually have a studio, and I have a client who was at the studio with us, and I'm not, trust me, not knocking it in any way, but she loved the hot works because it was that in and out. She could pick her time, she could go. There's so many benefits to doing hot yoga. It's so good. It's really good for those that detox. I have MTHFR, which is a dirty gene, if you've ever heard that word. And that's a great, great way for people like me to kind of up their way to detox more healthfully. But one of the biggest things, she just came back to the studio, is she said, I miss practicing with people.
Yeah.
And I think that is what's really important, is I would stress more than anything is for people to find a place where they feel comfortable, where you can make some connections, because anytime you have a community, you are going to be more consistent.
Yeah, that is really true. I did have a friend, we were meeting pretty consistently in the same class, and then she broke a rib. I was like, oh no.
Hopefully not in yoga, no.
No, she's just very adventurous, and it was on one of her travel adventures. So I totally hear that. I definitely feel like I've had a better class when she's there.
Yeah.
So,
and I would say a lot of people coming out of the pandemic, they are just craving to be in a class. They miss people. And even if you don't know anyone to start with, you start to become friends with the instructor. That builds confidence, right? Anytime we can take a little ambiguity out of the situation, it's empowering. And so then you start to recognize faces, right? And you've got accountability there. And there's nothing better than trying a new posture with someone next to you and laughing because maybe you didn't get it right, or celebrating because you've been trying something for months and you finally hit it, right? And so that's what I see people really embrace with practicing at a studio, is really being able to have that community to, fall in love with something, a practice of yoga.
mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm going to go back. I'm not sure we actually got to that sort of like lowest beneficial dose kind of thing, which I know sounds terrible. Like, what's the least amount we could do? But I really am interested. Obviously, more is better, because more meditation, more stretching, like all of that is better. I just am always like, for those that are on a time crunch, we always say everyone has the same 24 hours in a day, but I just don't really believe that when it comes to, moms that are working, and we just don't have the same availability. We have 24 hours. And so I'm conscious of people's ability to fit things in. Do you know what I mean?
Completely. So I would start by saying the definition of yoga is literally to link movement with breath. Okay. And so when you think about that, yoga could look like sitting on your bed when you first wake up, putting a hand on your heart, putting a hand on your belly, connecting to your breath for 1 or 2 minutes. And then maybe it's a simple twist. Maybe it's turning your gaze to the left, twisting to the right. Maybe it's reaching overhead, crossing up towards the ceiling. That might be your yoga for the day. And so thinking of it not so much as I have this requirement to say this is yoga, but the places that you can just maybe squeeze in. Maybe for you, yoga looks like a few breaths. Maybe for yoga for you one day is 30 minutes rolling out your mat and doing a little bit of vinyasa and building up a little bit of breath work and some movement. I tell people 5 minutes a day, right? If you're someone who's like, I want to start doing this, start with 5 minutes a day. If you're a morning person, I have one client who she tells me I did my bed yoga, under the cover yoga, that's what she calls it. And she literally, before she gets out of bed, just takes some really simple postures, little happy baby, some supine twists, and that's her yoga for the morning. Other days, she's got more availability. She has more space. For those that maybe have more of a consistent exercise routine, if you're a runner, maybe incorporating 10 minutes of stretching, of movement after your run. Or what I typically encourage with my runners, my golfers, my tennis people who really have a schedule, is to try to maybe do 45 minutes once or twice a week to incorporate that recovery on the days they're not playing or running. just because what you'll get the benefits is not just you'll get the benefits from the yoga, you actually are going to see an improvement in those activities you're doing. I have a group of men I teach, and they love yoga because it helps their golf swing. That's what they see the benefits. They may not see the benefits. They may not be touching their toes, but they see maybe a little bit of benefit on their golf course.
Okay. So, and you did touch on that before. I think I'm one of those people that's like, give me a schedule. So what I'm hearing is if you can make it to the studio a couple times a week, that's great, but you can just do it every day on your own, just a little here and there.
And I would say some of the ways, one of the biggest things I tell people, because people can get really frustrated, and this might be skipping ahead.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Okay. If you are doing it at home, invest in a good yoga mat. Okay. I would tell people not to go to Target and buy a $15 mat, because some of the biggest frustrations I see, whether it's me doing a one-on-one client or having someone in my class at the studio, is they show up and they have these mats that aren't really great, and their hands are slipping, their feet are slipping. And so I would say invest in a good mat. That's number one. And they can be pricey. My favorite brand, and I won't do a plug if you're not comfortable with it, my favorite brand runs about $150, but it lasts forever. It's something that, it's like a good pair of jeans, right? Invest in a good pair of jeans because you're probably going to wear them a lot. And so I would say that. And then also find some maybe channels on YouTube. There's so many on YouTube. I know a lot of people love Adrina yoga with Adrina, I think is her name. I've got a few videos as well. Find someone a studio, do it outdoors. Some people really find just laying their mat on the back porch can be really therapeutic. But those are kind of find something where you feel like you can be consistent with it.
And aside from a mat, what other props would you need for just starting? Anything, or what would you recommend for starting out?
If they're really interested, I would say a block is very beneficial. Foam blocks, you can buy definitely at Target for $10. And that's just going to help you allow those stretches. So if you're someone who maybe can't bring your hands all the way to the floor in a forward fold, a block is going to bring that floor higher to you until you get maybe a little more flexibility. They can also be used for more restorative postures. You don't have to have a lot of props. You can always use a pillow from your own room, a blanket if you want. Some people like to use a strap. I have taught at some shelters. And so one way that I provide those props at a low cost is I'll go to Goodwill and buy a bunch of neckties. And a necktie makes a great strap.
That's great, because I think that was another thing when I got into the first studio that I really did try. I was like, what are these things? Do I need them? Like, people have props. I don't know what I'm doing. So yeah, the blocks are really helpful when you can't, especially because I do identify as one of those people that's not very flexible. So I do need the floor brought a little closer sometimes.
Yeah, and I tell my classes that actually props actually can make a pose harder. So some people are like, oh, I don't want to use the prop. It means, but you know what? I've used props, the block. Last week I taught a core class. So we use that cork block, which is a good 5 to 7 pounds. We use that to lift up and use our core and really engage our core. So don't think of these props as I just stink, I'm not good at this, so I have to use all these props. No, they actually can make something harder. They can change a posture to where maybe you feel it differently, or maybe you challenge yourself in a different way. And then if you're using props in a restorative or yin, that just means you have a very yummy class. And it's like, I tell people it's like yoga nap time, right? It's deep stretching. It's finding a posture and laying there for 5 or 6 minutes. And I always tell people that it's, when you think of that yin symbol, you should be doing all forms of yoga. So if you're someone who's like, give me the power, give me that vinyasa, I need to burn 300 calories, those people should also be doing restorative, right? Because the idea is that you're doing a whole body, practice. It isn't just one. If you're someone who only does restorative, try to swing over and do a little vinyasa.
Yeah. One of the things that I tell my clients when we're talking about movement, I'm not a trainer myself, so I don't prescribe fitness workouts or fitness regimens for my clients, but they want to know, like, what should I do? And I always ask them, well, what do you like to do? And so if you've never tried yoga, you don't know if you like it. Like you might have this like preconceived, well, I'm not flexible or I, want to have my heart rate up or whatever. But I would just say like also as far as getting started, like probably just need to try it. Give it a couple of classes and see if it's something that connects with you because we've got to just find movements that we like to do. Those are the best. So if you don't like weightlifting, try yoga. I just think it's so important to move our bodies. That's why in my program, as part of the Live Well pillar, that we use movement not as in an effort to create more fat loss, because that's not what movement is for. It's really all the benefits in your brain. And like Amanda was saying, in the endocrine system, so many hormones and stress, all of that is happening through the way we're moving our bodies and just gaining so much love as well for seeing what our bodies can do. Getting into postures that you're like, I would have never thought I could do this. Or just getting a little farther into one, like I'm getting just a skosh more flexible, just a little bit. And having a better game, whether that's tennis or pickleball, for me, that's what I've been doing lately. That's my game.
Right.
So just finding something that you like to do, I think is the most important thing about movement.
I would completely agree. And I think the other thing is, finding a place that feels that you can grow community. If you try a yoga studio and it feels intimidating and they're speaking in Sanskrit and there's all these Bindi people, that may not be the studio for you. And not all studios look like that. The studio I teach at here in Franklin, Tennessee is, most of the teachers do not teach in Sanskrit because that can be intimidating.
I don't even know what that is.
So Sanskrit are the fancy yoga words, right? So the ones that a lot of people maybe you hear in a very traditional yoga studio. Like I said, I've been teaching for 10 years. I know all those names, but guess what? A lot of the people showing up in my class, they don't. And so I just want to take one more layer of intimidation away from the yoga studio. And so for me, that's just how I choose. And I might throw in one or two, but as just a way for them to learn those words if they want. But overall, finding kind of a studio that is cohesive to what you want is super important, and so if you go to one studio and it feels overwhelming and intimidating, you can either try another class, try a different teacher, or look for a different studio. And so not all studios are created equal, right? And there are some that are going to teach maybe a hot 26 much better, and maybe another studio that's much more inclined to restorative. So the studio that I teach at here in Franklin, I would say the demographic is typically 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s women. And so you're not going to go in there and you're not going to be finding these people who are doing things that you see on Instagram. Okay. We teach to who our demographic is. And yes, we want to challenge our students, but we also want to empower them. And it's not empowering to go into something and feel like you're lost. So.
Okay. Here's my last question. I actually didn't want to know the hardest. I was curious, what is your favorite pose?
Oh gosh. I would say I've got a few. I'll give you two. I'll keep it simple. I love a good restorative savasana. Give me a chance to just lay down and not think and not move and just be still. To me, that is, I don't get to do that very often. I would say for someone who is more adventurous, for me, I love half moon. And so that's a balance pose. That's because I feel really empowered in it. It's a posture that feels empowering. I feel strong in it, and it feels really good on my hips. So
nice. I would say my favorite is eagle. I like that. I like being all twisted up and then the release.
And that is one of the best poses for your endocrine system and your adrenals, because you're flushing, you're twisting, and then you release. And so you're giving your body that natural way of flushing itself out.
Nice. All right. Well, tell people where they can connect with you or learn more about what you do.
Okay. So the best way I typically communicate with my people is on Instagram, and that is wellness with a Lao. And then my email is wellnesswithamandalau@gmail.com. And then for those that are in Nashville area, I teach at a studio called Free Flow, and we are located in beautiful Franklin, Tennessee. If you guys have ever had a road trip to Franklin, definitely come by and see us. We've got lots of great teachers there, and we have a little trampoline class. We have some water classes. So it's a great fusion studio.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll put those links in the show notes as well. Thanks so much for being here, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Lisa.
Thanks for tuning in today for our third and final installment on our movement series. We will definitely still be talking about movement and exercise again, so let me know what questions you have that didn't get covered. Also wanted to mention that registration for my group coaching program does open this Friday. So even if you haven't had a chance to get on the waitlist, there is still room for you. If you are feeling on the fence about it, be sure to schedule a call with me so I can get your most burning question answered and get you on your way to losing your first 5 pounds. All those links are in the show notes. And if you're loving what you're hearing from me, don't forget to rate, review, and share the show.